So New Intimacies is a series of questions regarding machine-enabled relationships and their impact on accountability. Is that too loud? Because I feel like I'm yelling. It takes many different forms, and I tend to not do the same presentation twice. So it was a signing event, it was an object, it was a series of letters that got sent to the White House, it was an essay, and it's now, this is a different iteration of the same string of questions. So the signing event that I will kind of ground this iteration in was a signing party that involved a 3D printed monster finger with an imprint of my fingerprint on the index finger that allowed folks to sign a postcard that I had written in my name or their name, addressed to the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of State. And the postcard corrected an analogy made by ex-General Michael Hayden, who you may be familiar with, the former director of, oh, wow, it's all green. I'm okay with that. Are you okay with that? Okay. So, Hayden, who's the former head of the CIA and NSA, the postcard addressed a comment he made on CNN concerning airstrikes in Syria, but you may have him kind of like fresh on your mind because of a recent comment he made regarding the FBI Apple encryption situation, where he said, and this almost like when I read this, comment, I felt bad for like having corrected his former analogy, like a year prior. Yeah, so backdoors are good. Please, please, Lord, put backdoors in, because I and a whole bunch of other talented security services around the world, even though that backdoor was not intended for me, that backdoor will make it easier for me to do what I want to do, which is to penetrate. Yeah. But the irony is that the comment, or the public comment that he made that I was responding to with the postcards was, so it aired on CNN on September 12th, 2014. When he was asked about the use of airstrikes in Syria, and he said the reliance on air power has all the attraction of casual sex. It seems to offer gratification, but with very little commitment. So the reason Michael Hayden's statement is so horrific, obviously, is because his clumsy analogy kind of implies that eliminating an enemy demands intimacy. So by invoking this lack of intimacy as a problem with how we engage with an enemy, Hayden strategically avoids the alma mater of the issue, which is accountability. So my postcard read, I echo back his comment, and then I explain that casual sex relies on a mutual agreement and is by definition consensual. This is what makes it casual. An airstrike, on the other hand, is by definition non-consensual. Surprise is what makes it a strike. Typically, sex that is non-consensual is called rape. The point of rectifying Hayden's analogy is not to strengthen his argument, nor is it to debunk it. Instead, this correction unveils the perpetual use of distance as a mechanism, as a sore mechanism for disavow. Wet and wild, and then there was plenty of room for people to sign however they wanted to sign. So, however clumsy, blindsided, and sensitive his comments are, both of his quotes ironically demonstrate a warped grasp of consent. And so in order to kind of understand this, I figured I would kind of provide a quick little history, a quick survey rather, of like weaponized remote technologies juxtaposed with a brief history of cyber sex toys. Both as kind of like examples of how we can use technology to provide distance and still engage in obviously different ways. So I'll begin with this image of Marilyn Monroe. Wow. Taken before her pinup and acting career when she worked as a technician at the radio plane company. But I won't linger there. Western history tends to begin with the history of mechanical flight and kind of like the origins of like the flying machine with Da Vinci, and not to kind of like deflate the myth of like all the amazing inventions that Da Vinci brought about. The history of kind of mechanical flight and the brilliance of the genius of robotic engineering actually goes way further back to ancient Greece, to 350 BCE. And so this particular mathematician, Architectus Septerentum, came up with this steam-powered wooden pigeon, although that has also been contested. but it was essentially capable of mechanical flight, though it's been said that it wasn't a pigeon, it was a dove, and it wasn't powered by steam, which is, kind of amazing, 350 BC, but it was in fact like a pulley system. Either way, it's kind of incredible. And then the Latin East and the Byzantine Empire, and then the courts of Constantinople, Baghdad, and Damascus would have been highly proficient in mechanical arts, well before the Latin West. And so this, the father of robotic engineering is known as Al-Jazari, who made this elephant clock, which is pretty famous. It's been replicated all over the world. And it's like a highly complex system of really sophisticated robotic mechanisms. He was also known for his musical automata and all kinds of humanoid automata. And so this is like the 1200s, and he would have been heavily influenced by 9th century Baghdad scholars who would have been the Banu Musa brothers. Fast forward, to the 18th century, by which time Western Europe would have caught on with some of the trends in clockworks. And this device was made by Jacques de Vaucanson, who was a French inventor. And it was a mechanical duck that was basically capable of drinking, eating, quacking, and shitting. So in comparison to the really elaborate, clocks that were happening in the 12th century, it seems interesting. Voltaire would have said, or allegedly commented on the shitting duck by saying that without the shitting duck of Vaucanson, there would be nothing to remind us of the glory of France. So the earliest recorded use of a military unmanned aerial vehicle in warfare would have been August 22nd, 1849, with the use of these balloons used by the Austrian army against the Italian city of Venice. And essentially, these balloons would have held explosives and brought over by kind of favorable winds. When they were perpendicular to their target, they would have dropped their bombs. And then from there, I'm going to go really quickly to 1917. English military scientist Archibald Montgomery Low came up with the Ruston Proctor AT in 1917, which was a wire-guided rocket that was basically capable of unpiloted flight, but it had to be catapulted from the back of a truck. And so during his the test run, it crash landed, not because of a mechanical failure, but because he wasn't a pilot. So the project was pulled and defunded. He's an interesting character to me because, and this is just an aside, he would start projects and then finish them, and so it made sense in a way that they could justify kind of pulling the funds. But the irony is that around the exact same time in 1917, the Kettering bug was not defunded. And the Kettering bug, developed by Charles Kettering, was built, kind of operate on a similar system, except it was built to fly to a certain destination which would have been pre-calculated depending on how many rotations the engine would have had to have completed before arriving at that spot. And once it would have completed those rotations, it would then begin its ballistic downfall and then explode upon impact with the target. It was charged with mustard gas. From there, I'll go to Los Angeles, 1970s, with the drone father, Abraham Caron. This is someone who came up with the Albatross, which was capable of 48 hours of pilotless flight per tank of gas. And he made this out of his garage in Los Angeles. He eventually received grants from the CIA and DARPA, which is not surprising. But it's interesting that he's often kind of misleadingly accredited with having invented the first Predator drone, which is not true. His whole point was to show that he could make something brilliant and advanced with minimal materials but excellent design. So strapping on Hellfire missiles to good design was not something that he wants to take claim for. But so how do all these technologies relate to intimacy? While the long history of cyborgs and killer machines and sex machines and Austin Powers, fembots, is certainly rich terrain to kind of look at killer remote intimacies, that's not where I'm headed. I'm more interested in telecommunication devices that are sexualized and eroticized. I kind of like this tint. So, according to certain historical rumors, Cleopatra would have invented the first vibrator. I'm not going to go into that history either. Because in the information age, something else happens with like high-speed telecommunications. Remote means something different altogether. So in her essay, Blue Jacket, Data Jack, Telephone Scatology, Jane Moody argues that the provenance of the telephone can actually be found in desire. And so she goes on to describe like, you know, the really intimate action of whispering into the sexual orifice of the microphone and then receiving it through the sexual orifice of your ear. And then, you know, add into that a built-in platform for voyeurism, and it's pretty complex even at its roots. Fast forward, add dial-up, you know, and we arrive at network sexuality, plugged-in intimacy. This is what I'm interested in. Teledildonics, or cyberdildonics, refers to technology that enables remote sex where tactile sensations are communicated over a data link between participants. The term was coined in 1975 by Ted Nelson in his book, Computer-Lib Dream Machines. And there's all kinds of, you know, like really, like, just there's an array of possibilities. So this is Flushlight, which does exactly what it seems to promise. And then, like, they become, you know, more and more complex as this is what happens in technology. So some you can hook up to like an Oculus Rift, add 3D audio, you know, create your own avatar. Like it gets more interesting and more exciting, and I mean that word quite literally. And so this is Dr. Extreme, who's probably one of the more like exciting innovators in this field, who's a toy inventor and co-founder of Orgasmatronics. And he develops these kind of like open source, you know, sex toy hacking devices that you can buy or like learn how to, you know, hack your own, which is kind of exciting. And so he kind of advocates for what he calls erotic engineering, quantum dildoing, and less pants, more science. And here, I know, this sounds fabulous too. It's like, oh, have you heard of erotic engineering? So here he's showing a flame-throwing dildo. I know, amazing. And like he really gets, like he shows you how he made it, how you can hack it. It's all, you know, made with components you could probably find and buy. But so when, you know, when Margaret Atwood asks in her essay, Our Robotic Future, Are Humans Necessary?, I take this prompt seriously. Though I'm less interested in the implied threat that technology ushers the human out of the equation, and more interested in like Sandy Stone's position, which is that, you know, a notion of falling in love with your prosthetic. So in Sandy Stone's kind of famous essay split, Subjects Not Atoms, or How I Fell in Love with My Prosthesis, she describes the first time that she fell in love with a prosthetic, which is like she's, you know, laying in her bed and she's with a friend and they're making like a radio transmitter, and it's a bunch of like wires and like a hunk of like galena crystal, and all of a sudden there's like, you know, sound where there was none, and so a world erupts out of like the silence. And there's something there in like the rendering audible of a perceived silence that is precisely the kind of exciting visibility that technological prostheses can grant. This is opposite, though, to the attitude of dismissal that pushes accountability onto an other, or onto an algorithm, or onto a long, complicated, you know, command center, as seen here, which denies the human or sets of humans involved in pulling a long and complex trigger, despite the body that hits the floor when a drone strike hits a wanted or unwanted target. So in some sense, to dismiss the intimacy of this act is to discount the body that has been struck. Terry Eagleton says in Holy Terror, God, I hate all these quotes, but sorry. God is invisible because he is the ground and source of our seeing rather than an object within our visual field. So to be both the source and the scope of vision is in some ways to be placed outside the law. As the device that is used to engage in its many different forms that we see becomes smaller and more invisible, more informed, more commodified. These are like happy goggles. I don't know if you've seen them. It's, yeah. Closer. When do we fail to acknowledge accountability? To this effect, this VR Periscope, made out of cardboard, might be a far more interesting device, in that it is designed for a third eye, an overseer, an ultimate voyeur who can rely on distance to kind of be absolved of accountability. This was made by instructors Tyler Culkin and Chris Bassett, along with their students in a VR workshop at the Center for Integrated Media at CalArts. And it's basically a VR cardboard, like drone simulator that draws from invisibility and visibility of submarine, like Periscope viewpoints. So in thinking of other methods that shield bodies from accountability, I fell back onto medieval political theology, and I won't go into this too much, but I go into it in other iterations. And specifically to the Elizabethan doctrine of the king's two bodies, which states that the body of a king is made up of two distinct but inseparable bodies. The body natural, subject to mortal conditions, and a body politic, an office, a government, in some cases an orifice. Thus the neologism, the king is dead, long live the king. And we've seen this in use. I mean, there's plenty of really interesting kind of threads we could follow. Like, I think this picture kind of encapsulates it somewhat, despite the distortion. So like Malod was holding up a picture of Chavez, so he's been like kind of endorsed by a former leader who was in front of Simon Bolivar. Both are kind of heirs of the Bolivarian Revolution. And the image, this one, you can't see much of it, but it was reconstructed with 3D scans made from the remains of Bolivar that Chavez had exhumed. And it's on YouTube. It's interesting. So I too wanted to like make a Thief Diversion of the king's twinned body, to kind of augment and anonymize my response to Haydens comics. I'm still thinking about like how I'm going to respond to Hayden and make this finger. And this was all kind of built into my weird logic when I make things or approach things. So I looked to 18th century folklore, and I found the Hand of Glory, which some of you may know from Harry Potter or from history or because you've read about it. But what's interesting, and this is like an actual one that's in a museum in England, but the Hand of Glory, for those who don't know, is made from the dried and, as if it were like really common knowledge, the dried and pickled hand of a person who has been hanged from the gallows and committed up a crime. And you're supposed to take the fat from the body and then make a candle, which you place either on top of the hand or within the hand. And essentially the person who carries this talisman around is rendered invisible. Other accounts differ and say that if you carry the talisman, you can move and everyone else is motionless. But the point is, it's the ultimate talisman for theft, kind of like a body politic for thieves. So I made my own version, which was a 3D printed monster finger, designed by Brina Rasmussen Smith, with an imprint of my own fingerprint on the index, and a pen tip inserted beneath the nail. So if the Hand of Glory was used to steal, mine was used to sign. And then during an Easter resurrection party held at a motel in Echo Park, Los Angeles, along with Joey Canizero and Diana Deeb, who performed the Shame Ensemble, Mutant Salon, and Earl Gravy, I set up a signing table where people could kind of like insert this, monster finger and father or finger or author or re-author this postcard. 30 some odd cards were sent to the White House en masse, and I put my return address on all of them because that's, unless someone specified their own, which is fine also. So in a sense, like I'm interested in absurdist tactics, but that doesn't take away from like the seriousness of the issue. So while correcting Haydens' analogy is like as obvious as it is necessary, I'm interested in validating the virtual, or that which has been distanced from a non-virtual, as a way of renegotiating the way we think about distance. So a body that is engaged by a drone with like a Hellfire missile strap on is no less real than one that falls to the floor, graced by an intimate kiss of death. And so to argue that mediated interaction is a lesser interaction reinforces the logic that allows for this kind of disavowal, which is exactly the position that Hayden takes. So tele-intimacy is real, and we need to treat it as such. And that's it.
We have time for a couple questions if anyone has any.
I should also add there's another iteration, if you're interested, that goes more into like, spectrophilia and different forms of consent that's online if you want to look at that. Yeah.
I had a question about the prosthetics. I was interested in how because this kind of militarism aspect, have you considered the prosthetics of like injured returning like vets and the uses of prosthetics for legs or limbs or and then other forms of engineering and how that would integrate in your analysis? So basically about the prosthetics.
Oh, you want me to repeat the question back? Oh, so how like the question of prosthetics used for veterans and folks returning from war, like how that fits into this logic? Is an accurate echo. Yeah, I think that in this particular iteration, I didn't focus on that, but I'm interested in like that as an example of the exciting possibilities of how these technologies can be used, and also like in not thinking of it as we traditionally think of as prosthetics. So like this doesn't complete a body that was previously incomplete or was rendered incomplete. It's a body. Like it's just maybe a different iteration, maybe a changing iteration. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question, if anyone else has one.
Oh, I see a hand, two hands.
Actually, go ahead. No, please. I wasn't exactly sure what you were saying about the hand of glory, or how you were conceptualizing that as intervening in the mediated interaction and a disavowal.
So what's interesting about the hand of glory is the promise of invisibility. So by taking on, like, supposedly, according to folklore, you have to use the hand of a person who was hanged in the gallows. So this person would have been committed of a crime. So you're kind of like, you know, blaming someone else who's already dead and like is clearly a criminal because they were hanged for the crime you're about to commit. And so it becomes kind of like the reversal of like a body politic. Like it's like, you know, the like thieviness, you know, or something for like the crime you're about to commit. And so I wanted to find something similar, but not to like necessarily nefarious ends. Like how could I use that or make my own version? And spoofing tactics and trickster tactics are interesting to me, and serious irrelevance. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you.